Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Power of God and Anime. I'm Gary, and this is the esteemed cast of Steven, Duffy, and the main character. Thanks for being here, guys. How's it going?
I liked your intro voice. That's
It's going
good.
all right. Yeah, it was good. It was nice.
Thanks.
I,
Yeah.
I, I feel like I'm being introduced on stage. Okay, so this week we are talking about a very strange
Oh my
series.
gosh, yes.
And if you haven't seen it, be aware that if you try to watch it, it is very strange.
Disturbing.
It's Serial Experiments Lain. It is sort of a cult classic thing, anime. The people that love it hard. And it's one of those series that you either really like it or you really don't. I think that's a general consensus. I did so. Gary, you finished the whole series?
Yes. Yeah, I watched all the episodes.
Okay, Maine, did you finish it?
I just finished it right before I got on the podcast.
Cool. And then Duffy, I don't think you finished it.
I couldn't. There are these weird audio sound design stuff going on in the background of that gave me and my wife both migraine orders. Weird.
Yeah.
That's really strange.
Weird noises.
So when it comes to psychological horror and stuff like that, I can't stand watching the silence forever. And with Serial Lane, there's like 2 minute silence for one of the episodes. So when it comes to that part of the series, I would leave the speed on times 2 just to get through it.
I don't blame you for that. It is a little unnerving at parts.
Yeah.
It really is. Like, I don't think it was intended to be necessarily like psychological thriller, or maybe it was.
Well,
but it definitely.
that's what it's listed as in the anime categories.
Oh, well then never mind. I have no
Yeah,
idea what I'm talking about. But
I feel like the creators of this wanted you to feel uncomfortable constantly.
I think that's a good. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I was telling Duffy that I watched a YouTube video, a couple of YouTube videos, like synopsis on the show, and the guy who directed it, the video was called "The Guy Who Kept Anime Weird," and it's like that's the guy who made Serial Experiments Lain. Like it
Oh.
just got weird and weirder, and like his different influences and
Well-
stuff from like H.P. Lovecraft. So,
Yeah, I feel like
Oh,
was the show taking any inspiration from like Akira, or did it come out before that?
I feel like I feel like it's after Akira.
yeah, it came out
Akira
in.
was pretty early.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
felt
came
like
out
it was
in-
after as well.
I'm sorry. It came out in '97, and Akira came out
Yeah.
in '88.
Okay.
So, what it is just like where do we even begin with this show?
So, for me, and this is the biggest part, and one of the reasons that I wanted to I mean, it's not a secret that Lane, spoilers, is God.
Mm.
Like however you perceive like the concept of God, Lane is God.
Yeah,
If you look at it, she's pre-existent. The Wired just happened to be, tied into this nature of like a collective unconscious of the earth and humanity, and that's how people became aware of the existence of this God.
Yeah.
And that's not to say like it's a creator God, but it is definitely an infinite, spanning beyond time, basically seemingly all powerful creature, or being.
yeah, absolutely. Like it stated several times that she existed before the Wired. So before there was like a channel for her to be, something for everyone else to relate to her. She
Yeah.
existed.
Yeah, it said that humans
Um,
were able to make a collective conscience before even having the Wired.
Yeah. So the collective unconscious of humanity, and I don't know that that she is a representation of human collective unconscious in general, or if it's just that human collective unconscious is how Lane interacts with humanity, because she loves humanity. She basically she says, "I love humanity," and I feel like that the whole like the fact that she she loves humanity, and the fact that she is a represented as an all powerful, like, spanning across time being. It's like there's no way that it's not God. You could. I read an argument where somebody said that that she was the Earth, like the spirit of the Earth, basically. But in whatever it is, she's the deity of that world.
Yeah.
Dude. Okay. Yeah. We agree on that.
It's kind of hard to produce a counter argument for what you just said.
Yeah.
For Lain to make herself a body to feel closer to humans, that at least in the realm of Christian religion, is sort of like God sending down Jesus
Sure.
to
Yeah,
become one with humans.
I agree with that. I mean, Lain is definitely body Lain is definitely representative of Christ. And you can even see that where you have the false god of the world in the guy that I can't remember his name.
Ide. Something like that.
Ide?
Ide, I think.
Ide? I can't remember his name. Yeah,
Sorry.
he's basically the Satan in this story, and he even like comes up to her and he's like, "Hey, I'm the god of this world." And you have this instance where he's talking to her, and it's very much the temptation of Christ in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
In the wilderness, it's Satan.
Let me
tempting
fix you.
Christ.
Let me debug you.
Yeah, go ahead and
it's like if you'll just worship me, I'll give you whatever you want.
yeah.
Well, now I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, right, that's what I was gonna say. That dude entered the Wired after he had been killed, basically, from all of the newspapers.
He committed suicide.
Yes, but in the end, the very last episode, he's alive again. He's got a corporeal body.
Yes, and that is because Lain essentially recreates. She changes reality.
Yeah.
Yep.
To where things are better, and they haven't been messing with things because she only has a corporeal body because of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's Protocol 7, I think, is what it's called.
Yes.
Yeah.
That gave her that body. So that in that instance, the incarnation is not something that she necessarily intended.
Mm. It kind of happened, and even I seen like some people comment on like the beginning episodes where like her fingers are like smoky, is her like getting used to her body, and then you see her on a bunch of different places, and she's like just appearing these different places. She's trying to get used to, walking in the real world instead of just like zapping here and there and this and that.
What is either your guys' theories or theories that you've heard about the two separate lanes, like the two personalities right at the beginning?
There's two separate lanes. There's actually three. There's actually 3 lanes.
Okay.
So there's body Lain that we see.
Mm-hmm.
There is the lane that is the lane of the wired
Mm-hmm.
or the unconscious, and then there's anti-lane.
Okay.
Mind you, I got this idea from an article that an essay that I read on it, and he was basically saying that those things were representative of basically Freud's ego, superego.
Okay.
And so you have the superego being the wired version, you have anti-Lain being the id, and then you have normal, like, human Lain being the ego.
And the human Lain trying to connect more with the wired and the anti is to be more at one with herself?
Yeah, so I mean, like, this basically, there's a weird somewhat Trinity connection there. Obviously, it's not the same.
No.
But like wired Lain is basically God the Father.
Yeah.
In terms of like because wired Lain exists separate from Lain in a body, and you can see that even since because they see Lain in other places while Lain is in the body already, and the wired Lain transcends time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like the people that give themselves up they kill themselves or whatever, and they basically become spirits in the collective unconscious of humanity, then they seem to on some level partake in this like timelessness.
Okay.
Just, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't think on the same level that Lain does, because Lain has control over it. But I mean, like they're reaching out to Lain from the beyond. So yeah, and I don't want to go ahead. I don't want to say like I don't want it to be misconstrued that I'm saying that this is a one-to-one allegory for the incarnation and whatever else,
absolutely
because
not.
It's not. It's just there are some really like parallel themes running here, and some scenes that are like if like for instance the temptation one, if that's not where that's comes from, that's a really big coincidence.
Yeah. I would even say like the wire lane, as you said, kind of mirrors God the Father. Wire Lane is very confident. She uses her powers and uses her influence, whatever, like it's nothing. That's just who she is. Whereas Lane of the quote unquote real world, is more like the incarnation of Christ. Is more timid. She's more timid. She's humbled.
Well, she's
same
timid
as
until someone goes against what her ideals are, and then she'll smack talk you.
But you see, but when that happens, she's channeling the wired lane.
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Which would be the
So when
points
she
where
speaks with
Jesus was
with
talking
power
to
and
God.
authority. Yeah. So like when those moments where she's channeling the wired lane, that's her moments of she's being godlike.
All right. So
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask you. So in like episode 2, I think it might be, when they're in that club Siberia.
When the guy shot himself.
Guy shot himself. All right.
Yeah.
I've heard people say the guy shot himself because Lane freaked him out. He shot himself. I've heard other people say he had taken that acceleration drug, the robot drug, whatever, and Lane caused him to kill himself to save her friends. Of course.
I think both of those are valid theories.
Okay.
I don't know where I stand on it. Just because I could see both things being the case. I think the fact that he took it, and then he's saying, basically when he's talking to her, he's saying,
why are you making me do this?
Why are you making me do this? Like he doesn't have any control. I think maybe that lends more credence to the fact that Lain made him do it.
It could also be the fact that it's trying to point at humanity poking its nose into something it shouldn't, and then blaming God for all of its problems.
Okay, let me hear some more thoughts on that, because that's interesting.
So that technology was made for a human to have a stimulus of chemicals in their brain react at a certain frequency to make it feel like time has slowed down and make their brain work in overtime from, like, what did it say, 2 to 12 times more efficient?
Yeah, 2 to 12 times, yeah.
Which, if they put that on the market at all, that would have been tested to have no side effects, and yet this guy was already so messed up that he had a gun and just randomly started shooting things, meaning mentally he was already not stable. So when he took that, it accelerated his mental illness.
Oh, you know what? What's interesting is you can almost see if Lain did cause him to do that, to shoot himself. That's sort of like a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you've taken this thing, like that's the, this fruit of knowledge thing that makes you 2 to 12 times more brain power, efficient or whatever, and you are you're doing things that are harming other human beings, and so when she sees that, we get authoritative wired Lain coming through,
Mm-hmm.
and then he shoots himself, and it's almost as if that's some sort of like divine judgment
Yeah.
for, I guess, his hubris of trying to do that sort of thing.
His
I don't
Tower
know
of
if that I don't
Babel.
know if that holds up so much, but that's what it makes me think of.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely see that.
Let me. I don't remember exactly what he said whenever.
There's a possibility that I may lose my internet here shortly.
Is
We'll
the
miss you.
storming that bad?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I just want to let you know. So if I go out, that's what happened.
Okay. Duffy, since you basically read synopses of this, is there anything from what you were reading that like you wanted to insert
I
into this?
didn't. The synopsis I read did not make any sense.
Oh.
I looked.
That
I've
makes
read a
sense.
few. I read a few. Actually, before we started here, after Steven got on, told Gary for bed, I was like, I'm gonna read some synopsis. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, this is not really something that you can gain like an understanding of just from
Sure.
reading.
Yeah,
I mean-
did it have a manga, by the way?
I don't know. I didn't check. I don't think so.
I thought I saw a manga cover for it.
But I could be mistaken, so I don't know.
I don't think so.
Okay,
I mean,
I'm down.
obviously.
I'm downloading the episode right now, so I can see what the dude actually says word for word and what she says back, because I don't remember exactly.
Okay. Steven, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Ide appears, and he has in his god form, and he has like those red marks underneath his eye. Is that like, what is that like? Carry any meaning? You would say in like any kind of like Japanese folklore or like anything like that you know?
I can't speak to it enough. I mean, there are obviously like face markings that are sort of like present in representations of divine beings in various Japanese folklore.
Right.
But I couldn't tell you if those markings particularly in and of themselves mean anything.
I mean, I was getting some serious like Princess Mononoke vibes from it.
Well,
Sure,
you
sure.
also have the storytellers that do like the big jumping movements. They also have that red paint streak as well.
I was just curious.
I think those red stripes might mean someone who's omnipotent in something or other, because with storytellers, when they're telling you the story, they're creating that. They know all the knowledge you don't know.
What storytellers are you specifically referencing?
What are they called? The hold on.
The storytellers. Those guys.
The ones who go "Hyo!"
Like the narrators for like Japanese plays?
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know what they're called.
Called Hanashika. I don't know if I said that correctly or not. They're similar
Put
to
it in the chat. I'll tell you how it says.
yeah.
Apologize
There's
to all our Japanese listeners.
right. They are storytellers and are very similar to comedians, and they always teach moral lessons. So here.
Okay.
Um,
Gotcha. So there could be that could be. I don't want to say
Yeah.
that it is.
Right.
That could be an instance of him trying to come off as authoritative to Lain, because obviously she is Lain. She's God, but she's also a human. And very much in the same way as you have Jesus being God, but he's also human, and he doesn't have access to the full, power, knowledge, and whatever else that God would have access to. He's limited because he's in a fleshy body, when Satan was speaking to him and telling him all this stuff, it's like he spoke in very authoritative terms, and. If you're a human being out in the middle of nowhere and you haven't eaten for 40 days, and then all of a sudden someone comes along and says, "Hey,"
Oh. Okay, so the dude on episode 2, he says, "Why are you doing this to me? I want nothing to do with it. I just wanted to clear my head. You're that scattered god. I don't want anything to do with it. And the wired cannot be allowed to interfere with the real world." and
Well, the
Lain.
scattered god is not Lain.
No. But he was just like, the wired cannot interact with the real world, and Lain basically told him, no matter where you go, the everyone is connected.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I can't say for sure or not from just that.
Yeah.
But he was about to like shoot her and her friends. So
Absolutely. Yeah, he pointed it at her.
I think
Yeah.
that was the judgment, not because he took something, but just because he was like, I need to stop this nightmare.
But if when he's speaking, he's like, the wired should not. He took. He called her to the scattered god, which was the, I can't remember his name. Ide, is it
Yeah,
Ide?
Ide, I believe it is.
Yeah. So Ide, his name was basically the scattered god, and so he's taking Lain as being that. And then he's saying the wired can't interact with the real world. On some level, he's sort of rejecting this idea of like religion, or some sort of like godly control over humanity.
Hmm.
And in that he's like biting back at God, and so he on some level he does recognize Lain as God. And Lane's like, well,
Too
Go
bad.
away
He
now.
done messed up.
But what's very interesting is that like you can see there's this duality of representation between Lain and Wired Lain, because Lain is very loving and compassionate and whatever else, and that's because she is a human and she does have that body, and has those connections as humans do. But Wired Lain is so far removed that. And on some level, because Wired Lain has that control, and it seems to be a natural facet of who she is. There's no she has no qualms about killing people. Like that seems seems like killing people, changing people's memories, doing any. That's just her right as a being who has that power.
Right.
And that would make Id the troublemaker or Loki in this situation.
Okay, go on that a little bit more, because I'm.
Because if let's take this to the perspective of Norsic. Is it Norsic gods? What is it?
Nordic.
Thank you. Nordic gods. All-Father Odin being Wired, Normal Lane being Thor, and Loki being Id. Loki has, or Id Lane has all this information that she can do whatever she want with, and she's like, hey, this information is supposed to be for everyone. Why should we just have it? Let's spread it around. Let's make a little mayhem. Everyone should be able to hear anything and everything. Not really caring for other people's private thoughts or anything like that, just because it's fun. That if you noticed, Id Lane was always laughing, always
Sure.
Yeah,
poking
weird.
fun.
Smile.
doing things to people for enjoyment.
Yeah,
Right.
not because it was like actually the right thing to do or something like that. All the while, Human Lane was all about, I don't want to hurt anyone. I would save them if I could. And Wired is just, like you said, gray. I mean, gray,
Above it.
neutral. Doesn't do.
I wouldn't even say neutral. I think like in this terms, it would be above it.
Yeah.
Like in
above
sort
it.
of like a Lovecraft, in kind of a Lovecraftian sense of like morals do not apply to giant monster.
Yeah.
But and in some way, there's plenty of philosophers who make that same kind of argumentation in terms of Christian morality, or any type of like theistic morality, because God being the creator, or being all powerful, or being whatever else, like you can't say that anything God does is wrong, because all is the source of everything. So there, like for you to sit here and say, well, that doesn't make sense morally, that seems wrong of you to do, that doesn't apply to Lain, because the Wired Lane, because who are you, oh man?
Yeah. The only thing is, at least from a Christian religious knowledge, God does not contradict himself. So any rules that he had told humanity that he would abide by, he has continuously.
Okay, I'm trying to see how that connects to what we're talking
Because
if-
with, yeah, you go, Duffy.
Sorry, yeah, I think I know what you're saying here. It's like Wired Lane can do whatever she wants because she's above all that, as you're saying, right? But that's not how God operates. God, it sounds like Wired Lane doesn't actually have to abide by any sense of morality. God does. It is not because he's not like bound morality like we are, but he created that.
Chooses.
And if he weren't to abide by the same rules that he set up for the universe, like us, the moral rules,
Sure.
he would
Well, yeah,
cease
that's,
to
that's
be
a question. So there's a series,
God.
there's
And
a question. Go ahead.
and and a lot of Christians would agree with that up to a point where I would say if he did do that, he'd no longer be worthy of worship because he's no longer the
Sure.
same God that we're supposed to
so,
worship.
so we have to make some distinctions here because you have to ask: is God good because he does good things, or is God good because he's God and no matter what he does, it's good? So like that's
That's a deep
you
one
have to-
too.
you have to ask that question, and then depending on what your answer is, you have some other things that you have to deal with. Because because if you say, well, it's good because God does it, then that's sort of the end. Like you can't really argue with that. Like it's might is right. The rules don't apply to God. God makes the rules.
On a very surface level,
If you say that God is good because he does good things, then you have to ask the question, well, do the same rules of morality apply to God in relation to humanity as they do in humanity in relation to humanity?
Yeah.
Because if they do, why? And if they don't, why not?
well, they do, and
So like there's
that's
some serious questions that people that you need to consider when you're dealing with those questions of like the goodness of God in terms of like, what we think of in like
To
a
be fair,
Judeo-Christian standpoint.
I think they got around that in Lain, in Experiment Lane, because at the end she literally erased everyone's memory. She made a new world.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think at the end they did get around it in the sense that there was the creation in a sense was redeemed, and it was redeemed by the sacrifice of bodily Lain.
Oh, that is very fair.
Which is another thing that I was going to get to, but we're here now.
Yay!
Because like obviously Lain no longer exists in bodily form, and the when Lain, Wired Lane removes the physical Lain and then fixes everything to where it's better, you can take that as sort of like the basically the sacrifice of Christ in parallel.
Mm-hmm. And then when she comes back to visit her friend Arisu when Arisu is older, that's basically the Jesus coming back down for 40 days.
Wait.
Or is that the right number?
after the resurrection. Yeah, he was there for 40.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So okay,
No.
gotcha. So
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
talking about
Like
okay.
Pentecost.
Yeah, okay. I don't even know if it's so much that because like I said, it's not
It's not a one-to-one.
one-to-one, and it can't be. If you try to make it a one-to-one, I think you're reading too much into the story.
Oh, it definitely can't be, and obviously this wasn't intended by the author either. I mean, I know most of the time we'll talk about this stuff and say it definitely wasn't intended
I
by
would
the
bet
author.
money that the stuff that I've
But-
said though is like at least drawn from.
Possibly, but according to the author of this, he said, the creator of the show said that he specifically wanted to make this so foreign to anyone that wasn't Japanese that it would actually cause a bit of culture warring between American viewers and Japanese viewers. And the studio that made this said this was an enormous risk because you're going to be you're from the get-go trying to make this something that no one else but Japanese people will want to watch, and he went along with that anyway. So even if he, in the back of his mind, took some inspiration from scripture or something like that, it wasn't. I don't think any of that was
I mean,
intentional.
but like, I don't know if it's something that just because it's like a, if it wasn't intended, if it was some sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Archetype, archetypical story. We've it's been 2,000 years since the whole Christ story occurred, and it's been around the world enough times. It's hard to not.
Yeah,
pull some.
It's been heard in one form or another, whether you know it actually as the story of Jesus or as something
exactly,
else entirely.
Yeah. It's been iterated and reiterated in different formats enough to be able to, for you to tell that story again and not realize where its origins are from.
Yeah, I think I read the same article that you're talking about, Duffy, where he wanted Japanese and other people to they'll have different interpretations, but then they started like getting together on the internet and then they started coming to like same conclusions. So like their what they were drawing from wasn't as different as the author had wanted. So it actually turned out like the internet ended up ruining that, and he is 1997 talking about The Wire, the internet.
Is ironic.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Certainly. The exact quote was he wanted Lain to be, quote, a sort of culture war against American culture and the American sense of values we, the Japanese, adopted after World War II. It says that he created Lain with a set of values he took as distinctly Japanese, hoping Americans would not understand the series as the Japanese would, which would lead to what he was hoping for, a war of ideas. But if that's not the way things turned out,
I think perhaps he probably I think he may have succeeded in that way just because we may be interpreting the story differently than he intended it, and whereas a Japanese audience would interpret it, and that may be intentional. Like the symbolism that we get may not be what he's trying to convey to a Japanese audience.
So I'm not sure whether this was intentional or not, but the reason I immediately messaged after like 2 or 3 episodes this series was weird to me is because it's a little bit way too close to our reality that we have right now. Not in the sense that we're able to connect straight to the internet yet, but not only are we connected to people in a way we've never been connected in the series of humanity before, but also it makes us numb to everything going around. In the 3rd episode, when they're talking about the dude that killed himself, they're all like, isn't it a bit weird that we actually don't care? Like, we're not feeling any empathy towards this dude we saw shot in front of us?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
that's... sitting around joking about it.
Yeah, that's about kind of our society in general right now.
Sure, we're able to see all of this stuff and know these things almost in real time.
And we see it so constantly.
But on some level, but it's not just about constantly. I mean, although that is a factor of it, it's about the distance and the divorcing of it, because we see it, but we're not present for it and don't have the actual connection to it. So like we see things happening to disconnected human bodies that we don't have any relationship with, so it doesn't really hit the same as if it was something that was happening to us or somebody that's around us.
Most of the news we get, the tragedy is, this happened in another state. This happened 1,000 miles away, or Canada, or Europe.
A Florida man.
A Florida man. I mean,
Florida man.
Crazy things happen there so much that it's now a joke. And no, you don't. If you read Florida man eaten by alligator that he tried to put slippers on, you're not going to be, that poor Florida man. You'd be like, that's ridiculous. There is that disconnect from other people.
Yeah, it seems like it's okay. It's like I read this on the internet. And it's like, well, that's the real world. Like we've somehow like separated the internet from the real world, but they're all the real world. Kind of like how The Wired and the real world to Lain, that was all the real world. By the end of it,
there's no difference.
So like
And
stuff you,
on some level, go ahead.
I'll say like stuff you put up on the internet or YouTube or Facebook or whatever. It's like, oh well, that's something different. Well, it's the real world. Those are real words. Those are real thoughts being
Well, I can't
pronounced.
I can't say that that is a definite representation of the world, because a lot of things that people post on YouTube are very scripted, very fake, making their own world.
Sure, but that's not to say that
Yeah.
the Wired does not have impact on the real world.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not just I'm
Um,
not saying like there are some people
It's
who
not that
are
it's an
like you play a
accurate
video
representation
game.
of the world.
Yeah, like there's some people who say you play. I've heard people say you play a video game where you kill people. You're like killing a person. I don't agree with that by any
No.
slight
No.
thing of the matter. It's a game, and
Yeah.
there's an obvious distinction in things like that.
If you want to get
Um,
rid of video games, you got to get rid of chess. I'm just saying it.
Do you know
chess
how many
alone.
pieces? How much regicide has been committed with chess?
Oh my gosh.
Kings and queens.
To be
all
fair,
over
the
place.
king never dies.
He's captured
That's true. He's captured, but you can
and
kill
tortured.
the queen. You can kill the queen.
Still read this up.
Thing is, we when it comes to video games, like I've killed so many people, and I have this thing like I've seen.
I'm gonna isolate that clip.
I've
of
killed
Guppy saying
so
I've killed so many people.
in video games. But
Just long
the
enough
thought,
pause.
even if somebody broke into my house and was threatening my family, the thought of having to take that person's life to protect my family is still something scary to me. Like, I can't mentally. It's like I don't know if I could pull a trigger in that sense. Like, I'd have to protect my family, and it would probably be considered. You could argue it's the right thing to do, but it's still a huge leap from going from oh, I kill people in video games to taking an actual life.
Sure.
So
sure, and I think you're onto something there as far as like representation in a media sense versus real life.
And as for when you
'cause
talk
on
about being
go ahead.
disconnected from like the tragedies we see online, it's not just because it's so far away that these things happen, but the human brain, I would argue, we're not really built to be able to connect to every single tragedy we hear about, especially if we're hearing about every tragedy that ever happens. Like, if someone you know dies or someone on your block dies, even if you never met someone on your block, it might affect you more than reading in detail about someone that died in a different state or a different country or something.
Sure.
If we were to try and take all that on and take it personally, you'd probably go crazy. And I argue that there are people right now in the world that are taking every single one of those stories seriously, to the point that it is driving them to like, well, what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that you shouldn't take things seriously in the sense of like these are bad things and you should do what you can to try to address them.
Oh no, but taking it
or be
personally,
knowledgeable of them, but like
That's
taking,
heavy.
but I get what you're saying, like taking them personally in the sense that it's emotionally affecting you to where you're harmed, like, you know, the death of somebody on the street hits you like it's your brother.
yes.
You know, and while there's some sort of like, you know, greater humanity to that, it's not useful per se, because we only have as humans we only have so much emotional availability.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any other themes that you guys have picked up from Lain that tie into anything else, like any other?
I'm not sure if this ties into anything. I was just gonna comment on, I enjoy subtlety when it comes to anime, and the subtlety of almost every single episode starting the exact same with the people walking in the cross street and the car driving by. That was the best feeling every time I turned on an episode.
Okay, why is that?
It's the repetitive nature. It's the life still moves on no matter what happens. Whether you believe that there's a God or not, there in the reality of Lain, there is a God and life still moves on.
Yeah. Of course, I'm sure that there's somebody that's listening. You know who you are. Who's gonna come? Who's gonna come?
We all
Who's
know
gonna
who
be
it
very
is.
upset who's going to be very upset and be like, no, Lane's not actually a god because there's, testable whatever else, like, it's provable. And it's like, that's not the point. It's not the point that it's provable. The point that it's representative of a god, and it's fulfills the role that you would give a god.
Yes, and they even forementioned that whenever she was talking to the fake god, whatever his name is, that he was like, yes, only this kind of being can be a god. Only this kind of being can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
so,
side?
Go
go ahead.
No, you're fine.
I was going to say, side note, E-Day trying to like manifest himself into the real world.
It's 80.
80. Sorry. Not
80.
E-Day.
80.
Sorry.
It's EIRI. 80.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But when he's trying...
Airy.
That guy, when he was trying to manifest himself into reality and just became like this amalgam of just like flesh and blood and bone and junk.
Machines.
I mean, that took me by surprise. I was not expecting that.
Well, that's why I said it was like there was definitely some tie-ins to Akira for sure.
Yeah.
Sure, and I think that lends some credence to the idea that, like, at least the collective unconscious is tied into the power that's associated with deity in that universe, because, like, being in the Wired, and then writing the commands in the in so you can almost say that, like, the Wired is pre-existent, and then the physical creation of computers and the programming, whatever else, is almost like a physical analog to the spiritual world, which allows us to be able to access and change things of the spirit world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Kind of like when everything was ready for Lain to appear. I mean, even though she was pre-existent, she hit these perfect circumstances. Kind of like when the fullness of the time was come. We read in Ephesians. Like, everything lined up for the appearance of Christ and everything from there. So everything lined up for Lain to make her appearance.
I think one of the biggest shocks for me was that her family was fake.
Oh, really?
Like, when I was watching, I was like, this is ridiculous.
The scene with her sister, kind of like, I don't know what to put on with that. Like, one minute she's like great, but then like the next minute she's like an invalid. She doesn't know, she has nothing going on.
Yeah, so that has to do with, she's like basically been corrupted.
Okay.
So there's this moment where she's been, I think she's in a diner.
Yeah.
And she's given something.
The Knights.
And
yeah.
then,
okay.
Yeah, and then right after that, she's like, so basically what happens is that she has her physical body. Mm-hmm. She's given whatever she's given. She's basically been ejected from her physical body. Right. And into the Wired. And whatever's left over is like a shell that has been reprogrammed. That's not really her.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Remembering it, I'm like, oh yeah, the Knights. I keep forgetting about those guys.
Yeah.
And,
the Knights of the Eastern Calculus.
Well, the Men in Black and the Knights weren't the same people.
No,
yeah,
they
of
weren't.
course, yeah.
But
I'll say I only saw a few episodes of this thing, but hearing that her family was fake, that explains a lot.
Seems like her mom was just such a terrible person. Hey, Mom.
This is...
What, Lain? No, Lain. Go to bed, Lain.
I never even
saw... the dad was interested.
I never even got to an episode where her mom said anything. Like, she'd say something to her mom, and her mom just be like...
Silent, yeah.
Lain's mom's the worst.
Yeah, at least the dad was interested in what was going on.
You're saying Lane's mom's the worst. I'm still working my way through the first seasons of Baki, and I'm like, no, I'll tell you who's a bad mom.
Wait a minute. How far are you in Baki right now?
I'm currently in the middle of season 2, so the tournament arc.
He's in the maximum tournament right now.
Oh, okay.
That'd be a fun episode to
Baki
do.
yet.
The morality of Baki. Baki versus Yujiro.
Yeah, the morality of Baki and the relationship between Baki and Yujiro is coming.
Well,
that's the thing I'm going to do.
I haven't read the manga on that, so...
Well, okay.
Okay, fine. Mr. Manga over here It's the power
Well,
of God in anime, not the power of God in manga.
I've watched all of the
Yeah, but
anime
you've
series.
not seen all of the stuff where because right now in the anime series they're really just getting into the relationship between
Yeah,
Yujiro
they
and
haven't
Baki.
hit a good part in that where I feel like we could possibly discuss that.
No, we
in
definitely
depth.
cannot.
Yeah.
Especially not with Duffy just being in the middle of season
Hey,
2.
as soon as I get
and,
through
and
haven't
this,
Gary
watched
would
it.
never have seen it at all.
The problem is I have to
put it on my
find.
to-do list.
I'll cut this out of the
Don't
podcast.
watch it in front of children.
Yeah, the thing I have to watch it once Emran's asleep because blood, sometimes language. Like when she's in bed, my wife and I sit down and watch some Baki.
Do yourself a favor and watch it in Japanese though.
Yes.
I'm watching season 2 in the sub because there's absolutely no dub to find. I can't find the dub, so I'm like, okay. I'll just put it this way: I really need to get into season 3 because doing all these Oliva videos and having to find clips of Oliva in a season I'm not even in
Doesn't
yet.
spoil
I'm
anything?
like, yes, things have been spoiled on me already, and it's frustrating
I'm
because I
sorry.
really want to watch this because I'm into it now. It's in my top 10 series.
Well, I'm glad because it's fantastic.
It's amazing, dude.
People can talk trash about Baki all the time, but there's no it's just a fighting series and there's no storytelling or character development. I will fight you because there totally
No,
is.
I-
What's that one
watched this
person
after-
said on Twitter? Meathead anime.
We got so far into it, I
don't
realized, this Baki's got a lot of the same kind of attitude toward fighting that Goku has, and I really like Baki a whole lot more than I like Goku.
For shame. I can't
His,
believe you just said
hey,
that.
his character development is not yet over, so look
Sure,
forward
it gets
to that.
better. Hopefully.
But yeah, so
Back to Serial
going
Experiments
back
Lane.
to Lain.
Sorry for that detour.
After a short detour, which we sometimes do on this show.
And some people will be very angry that it wasn't reflected in the title.
To be fair, we appreciate you watching, and I'm just poking fun. You're a cool guy.
Anybody who watches this or listens to this, you are the best people in the whole world, bar none. Absolutely. You're
but yeah,
Uh,
good looking,
so-
and you'll succeed in everything you want to do in life.
Okay, so you know how you can divide YouTube videos up in segments now? I was gonna have at this part of the time
Yeah.
go. Gary just smoozes the audience.
So so let me ask you this. Do you think that Lain is pre-existent from humanity, or she is a representation of the collective unconscious of humanity?
B, just because there was so much in the last couple of episodes where there was this random narrator we had never heard in the entire of the series, just talking about things connected to the Earth, microwaves that sometimes have a collective thought that actually comes out, and the Earth is becoming more like how it was, and how human beings were connected from the beginning. I was like, this is very weird that we've not had this up until now, and it doesn't match any of the voice characters, not even the fake god.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably say that Arthur's intent is Lain as a representation of. I want to go with B, but then it's I don't know. It's hard for me to pin it down.
Sure. No, I definitely can see B, and that's obviously why I asked the question. But I feel like that there's layers to this. I feel like there's Lain, who is the pre-existent one, and then you have the collective unconscious of reality of human beings, which allows humanity to sort of commune with this pre-existent being. And then you have the wired, which is a physical representation of of access to the collective unconscious, basically, where you have layers of being able to get closer and closer to deity.
Right.
And if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's shown through how some people in the Wire they were only able to generate a mouth, or barely some part of their body, whereas Lain was she was whole in the Wired, but they were trying to achieve that, like you said, closer to that identity of deity but they're only able to go in incomplete.
Which is what humans try to do in general, is they always want to be closer to what they think is God.
Okay. Delve into that a little bit more because
I'm
like you
going
can
to-
take that as a
Explain
Okay.
yourself.
Okay.
I'm going to title this video "Steven Asks Main Character to Explain Himself." That has happened like 5 times now.
It has happened about
Explain
5
yourself.
times.
Okay. So
To be fair, though, I do ask a lot of questions. So.
I get it. I get it. Like, I like to leave it open ended to let everyone come up with their own thing before I share my thing. So it's not like, oh, I'm just blasting you with whatever I think.
Okay, based off of what I heard you
all
say,
right,
though,
so
man.
restate what you're saying. Let everybody else talk, and then you can come in and enlighten us.
Yes.
No,
yeah.
Based off what I just heard you say, though, Main, I actually agree with that. Go on.
Okay. So whenever, even if you don't believe in a almighty being or whatever, just in general, whatever you put your most time into, whether that's, I really love watching this one TV show. I really love enjoying this activity. I really enjoy food. This.
Sure.
You have gods or a god in your head, whether you believe in an actual being god or not. So whenever you're trying to get closer to that god, you spend as much time with it as you want. You get to know it better. You always try to get closer and closer to that.
Sure. The kind of concept that human beings are very spiritual, and we have this desire to worship on some level,
Yes.
and we're going to worship something no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that something is ourselves,
Yeah.
or
even
if
if
it's
it's
like an
ourselves.
ambition or a a goal.
Ego.
A dream or an ideal or something.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's
I
something that
worship
we.
beauty.
There's something that
I
we
And
really-
I think there's a case to be made for that for humanity, because I don't think that there's anything necessarily inaccurate about that from an anthropological perspective, because I think humans have been shown to be very spiritual creatures in general, and I think that may have something to do with our pattern recognition, or it may just have be something that we developed as a means of explanatory things about the world, or it may be, as some people put it, an innate part of what it means to be human that points us in the direction to seek God.
Okay, so I want to say I agree with what Main's hypothesis is here, because I think you can see that in a lot of different examples. Like I said, even if someone doesn't believe that there is a God, you will still probably, I'd say most people will probably find themselves doing at least something that they're passionate about that actually reflects an aspect of God. So I'd say that artists, whether they're painters or writers or anything like that, they create because our God is a creator. People who dedicate their lives to charity, or at least all their spare time to charity and fundraising and stuff, they're doing something that reflects God because God is a God of mercy and grace.
Sure.
People who go to the army, people who join, law enforcement agencies, hopefully are doing so because because they love the idea of justice. They want to see good triumph over evil. And it's just kind of like you can see that reflection of God in the various things people do, even if that's not why they're consciously doing it.
Yeah, Joe Rogan even said he had a dude on there who was an artist once, and the podcast right afterwards, he was like, that dude connects to his muse. Whether you believe in a god or not, that man acts like there is, because he is trying to connect to that muse to power his art, whether
So
you
there's
believe it
this-
or not.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that was it.
So there's this scene in The Great Divorce, which if you've not read it, you should read it. There's this scene in The Great Divorce where there is a painter who is talking about, all the stuff that they went through in life about painting and whatnot, and all the garbage about academia and being accepted by the the artistic community and whatever else. And he's a lost ghost. He's like a ghost visiting heaven, and one of the redeemed spirits of heaven basically tells him that, well, you didn't care about any of that stuff to begin with. What you cared about was light. Light was your first love. You cared about representing the light that you saw in the world, and somehow along that journey you lost your way. But your initial draw to whatever that was the goodness that you saw represented, that was pointing you in the direction of deity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really paraphrasing.
I feel like for me.
Which, by the way, Duffy, you've had my book for a while now. Read the book.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I'll read the book.
Oh snap!
I'll read it. I'll start reading it tonight. How about that?
No, you better read it
It's
now.
very short. It's not that long.
Okay. I'd say for me, creating, so especially when I'm writing, which I've been doing a lot of lately, I feel closer to God, or at least maybe I understand God more writing stories about characters and stuff, because it's like I kind of feel like that same or rather a similar parallel feeling of having characters that I'm trying to develop and see them go through different paths of life. It's weird because you can't really get the feeling of what God sees when he's like outside of time, outside of the world and stuff, but I get like this glimmer of what that might be like when I'm writing. And I think no matter what your passion is, if it's something that reflects an attribute of God or an aspect of what he does or something like that, you might get glimmers of what God goes through on a daily, eternal variant
and
of daily
think
basis.
glimmer is a good
Because it
thing,
can't,
because
you couldn't possibly be comprehensive, but just those little sparks.
You're going to get an experience of whatever that is. I just thought of something that another topic about like the series that I wanted to ask you guys about. So Lain loves humanity and she wants humanity to have freedom. I don't know if you remember her talking about having the ability to like be free and like choose things.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the story, she wipes people's memories and resets things, brings people back to life, does things that people didn't ask her to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So on some level, there's a tenuous relationship between the concept of free will and like God, the sovereignty of God on some level. And I think that's that whether or not that's the intent, that's a theme that is coming out in that particular like relationship between Lain and humanity.
I feel like at that point the way the timeline had been going, there was no one that actually wanted her in the real world anymore. Like the only
so
one,
she gave them what they wanted.
Yes, the only person I could think that didn't care one way or the other was that little kid. Just because he didn't seem to care one way or the other. But at that point, I feel like that was a minute detail to the overall. Everyone who had heard of Lain was like, all right, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And then she was like, okay.
Sure.
That sounds a lot like God in the Old Testament, especially. It's like I want.
Yeah, it's like,
God
look,
wants
this is
everyone
you
to...
wanted a king, you wanted a king, you wanted a ruler. Here you go, and now you've messed up. Look what happened.
God's like, I want us all to just live in harmony and peace and everything to be good. And they're like, yeah, but Baal, go away. And God's like, fine, just have it your way. I'll see what that gets you.
It's like, you know what? Cool. I'm gonna go for a little bit, and then y'all tell me how that works out. And they're like, "Oh no, God, come back!" It's like, really? I was just here. But that
7 Israeli rebellions later. I'm telling you. One of these days, I'm not coming back. Okay, I'm gonna come back. I always come back.
I was going to say with when you mentioned like a kind of like a reset, like immediately my mind went kind of like the story of Noah. It's like, it's just, but instead of destroying everybody, there is, she just resets it, and I think even with um, everyone, no one knows who Lain is anymore or whatever by the end of the story. But there are people like at the end, that girl is familiar with her. Hey, do I know you? So there is almost like a remnant, so to speak, could reach for him possibly, even after she's gone.
Sure.
She's
I
left.
think
There's
there's
a
this.
remnant.
Go ahead.
I was going to add on top of another thing. At least in our timeline, God promised Noah he would not flood the earth again. So we don't have any confirmation about that in Lane, but it's like maybe it's like, all right, I'm not going to reset the world again because I've already decided I'm not going to get involved.
Sure. And I think on some level Gary was onto something because there's this concept of you know Lane removed herself, reset the world to I perceivably something that people would be happy with. Like that, like she reset the world in a way that people would be happy and fulfilled in some way or another. But on some level, she still appeared to at least one person. So it's like more of like a person to person possible relationship with who Lane is rather than like immediate overarching over the whole world sort of thing.
So instead of like a corporate relationship, it's a personal relationship, kind of
Yeah.
like the shift from Old Testament to New Testament. In New Testament, outside of like people like Noah and Methuselah and Abraham, uh, Old Testament, a lot of people didn't have. Not everybody was granted that access to the personality of God, and
Yeah.
not everyone had access to the Holy of Holies. Whereas now, New Testament times, Christ is a personal Savior,
Yeah,
to all.
in the sense that Lane came. It's a reach. It's a reach. I'll give that it's a reach. She came to speak to her closest friend, the one person that she had a real connection with as a human being. Um, but on some level, you could say like if she could very easily, being who she is, do that same sort of thing on some level with all of humanity, because she's obviously not bound by um,
Moral.
time or space or you know being
Um,
in one place at one time.
there's some I want to touch on real quick. I know we probably don't have a ton of time left,
No.
but there's a, but of course, there's also the view of the issue of like mental health within Lane, within the story of Serial SEL.
Yeah.
What do you guys feel about that?
In what way
Yeah.
specifically?
What do you
I don't
mean
know.
specifically?
Well,
I
there's
mean, like,
one
because obviously
with
mental
well,
health is a theme of discussion.
right. For instance, instead of splitting Lane into, uh, the personalities of the Trinity, she just has multiple personalities. She's one person online. She's one person in real life, and then she has,
Oh.
and then there's evil Lane or anti Lane or whatever.
Oh. I see what
So-
you're saying.
So I mean, there's things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
like how your personality is completely different on the internet than who it is in real person.
Yeah, people want to step up on Twitter, but they won't step up on the street. So
Yeah, it's like
Test Jesus, but don't test me.
yeah, try Jesus, but not me, because I fight.
because I throw hands.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's fair enough because people are act one way on the internet because the consequences of acting that way on the internet don't carry over as they would in real life. Like for person to person, you couldn't berate somebody face to face repeatedly for days and days and days without getting your teeth kicked in. And on some level, I don't think that should be like. There's some that anonymity creates a bit of like, of a problem, and not to say that people should be silenced in what they shouldn't, that like, oh, you shouldn't be able to say things, because obviously like there's blocking mechanisms and whatnot, but like, because there's something, I don't remember where this is from, but it's like somebody said, you talk like someone who's never been punched in the mouth. And you know somebody who talks like they've never been punched in the mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think a lot of people think that like mental health and religion in general are like separate things. Like for some reason, if you're in a church, you can't talk about mental health because it's a demon or
gosh.
it's a,
Oh,
Yeah, if that attitude could just die in the next few months.
Yeah, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a Christian psychologist. Those things can't exist together.
So I had a psychology professor's introduction to psych over at Bob Jones University, and that was basically it. Like, how do you run the psychology department and not believe in psychology? Everything, he blamed absolutely every mental. It was either, oh, it's video games' fault, or it's a demon, or it's just you're not right with God. Those are the only things that it could possibly be. Apparently, video games are so powerful that in the 1970s, mankind just created a brand new reason for you to not be okay mentally. Before that, it was just demons and not being right with God. That attitude has to die, because it's a problem that many Christians will never get checked out because they've been told it's not real or a real problem.
They will never go speak to a mental health professional, or obviously pastoral counseling, fantastic. You need that sometimes. You need pastoral counseling, but there's some things that your pastor is not qualified to talk about.
No.
Taxes.
Taxes.
No, I had to go to therapy this year, and somebody asked me, why don't you just go talk to the pastor? And I said, because this is some deep-seated childhood trauma I need to talk to somebody about. And they said, yeah, but what do you think why wouldn't you just talk to the pastor? I'd say, because the pastor is not qualified to talk about deep-seated childhood trauma.
Yeah. What does the pastor know about neurology? What does the pastor know about like psychological, theories of the human being, the human mind? Like,
and I had spoken to a
pastors know that stuff
years ago about this stuff, and the pastor said, "Okay, are you praying every day?" Sure.
Yeah.
That is not an answer to my problems.
I'm reading my Bible.
I'm
praying.
I'm
still having issues.
Are you reading a Bible? Are you praying? Well, then I don't know what to say. You must not be praying. You must not be praying with your heart in it. Or are you just reading? Or are you really reading?
Okay. So I was listening to the Naked Bible podcast, and Dr. Heiser was talking about I love your cat, by the way.
Thank you.
Dr. Heiser was talking about something that was very similar to that. If you like, in specifically to things related to Proverbs, taking all Scripture as being completely equal with all other Scripture, and you cannot do that with things like Proverbs, because Proverbs are pithy sayings that are meant to relay, a basic idea of something, and they're not God's promises, so to speak.
Yeah.
So when you say like, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So that leads to a lot of issues when you have adult parents who've raised their children in the church and have taught them things and had them read their Bible and whatever, and had them go to church and been ideal parents and not trash parents, and then their children leave the church, and then they sit there and go, oh, well, if I had just let my child, if I just made them read the Bible 10 more minutes a day, or if I had just done X, Y, and Z more, like there's some sort of like ritual that you should have performed to make God do the magic to make sure that your child doesn't walk away. And that's not how that works, because those proverbs are not meant to be promises of God. They're just basic wisdom to pass on for understanding. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's like talking about gray hair is a sign of a righteous, human being. And it's like, no, you can't take that as the same thing now, because when people didn't live quite that long back in the day, and so if you saw an old person with a head full of gray hair, you were taking that as God's providence because they
somehow made it this far.
Yeah, they somehow made it this far in a world where you're dying at the age of 40.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, that doesn't apply anymore. But the basic idea of the wisdom is still there, and you can draw some ideas about the wisdom, but you can't say that it's.
Well, that's
it's,
why.
Go ahead.
Didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought.
No, it's gone. It's gone now, Maine.
Thanks. That's why I love hearing whenever people talk and say the Bible is the living word, because as long as you take into consideration, as we talked about time and time again, the time and the culture of when things were written, all of the Bible can be applied to your life now. It is a living, breathing thing for each individual who reads it. You will interpret differently than I will interpret it.
Yeah, but once again, those meanings have to be interpreted through time, culture, and not just time and culture, but the type of literature that it is written.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
like whether it's a history
or Psalms, which is just Psalms.
Or a song, or if it's a proverb, or if it's a military record,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's a whatever those particular types of literature, those genres of literature that would exist in that time frame, there are certain tropes, so to speak, that you would find in those types of literature that you're going to find in other ancient types of literature written at that same time period. And they're written in order for the people of those times to understand it.
Yep.
And so there's certain stuff that we're going to look at and say, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think like maybe a perfect example of that is when Christ is talking about how the mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds. Okay, so the mustard seed isn't the smallest seed in the world. The smallest seed in the world exists in like Alaska or like Siberia or something. But do you think middle-aged Mediterranean men knew about Alaska or Siberia? And if Christ was like, this Russian seed, what,
Like, first of all, what's Russian?
Bratsputsia, Magog, but anyway, yeah, so like taking the actual smallest seed wouldn't have done anybody any good, but to them, the mustard seed, yeah, it's so small, but yet if you have the faith of that something that small, that's not the point. The point isn't the mustard seed being the smallest being the smallest seed in the world. It's the point that if you can exercise the faith, the principle behind the parable is what needs to be grasped.
Like, I don't know if you got, I know I've turned both of you and Duffy onto the Naked Bible podcast, but there's a particular issue where he's, a particular episode where he's talking about ghost stories. And there is when Jesus is walking across the water toward the disciples, and they perceive him to be a ghost. Mm. So that literature is actually written in the same way that ghost stories are written in that time period.
Right.
And what's very interesting is that it takes a trope and subverts it, because a ghost can't walk on the water. That's not a thing a ghost can do. But people who would be reading in that time frame, like a Greek audience, would understand that walking on water means that you are a divine being.
Oh.
But the Jews, the disciples, didn't understand that.
Right.
So it's this symbol that is being specifically referenced to a Greek audience in order to convey that Christ was divine.
Mm-hmm.
And to us, it's just like, oh, he walks on water. That's special powers. That means he's God. But to them, it's a like specific thing that a divine being would be doing.
Very much on purpose signal, flashing lights kind of thing. It's like bing, 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 bing.
I'm pointing in this direction that this is a divine character.
This guy. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep. Anywho, any other topics we can cover that we might have missed or that we want to just overall go over? I enjoyed the series. Just it's not something that I would
ever watch again on purpose.
Yes, that I would ever one, like I said, I don't really care for psychological horror theme stuff, anyways. But because I did my little speed through trick, it was fine for me. But it also like mentally gave me a couple of questions here or there. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But it is a good. For anyone
Yeah,
who's
if you
interested,
deal with existential crisis, be
don't
careful
do
about
this.
this
Yeah.
series.
I definitely recommend it for anyone who wants to have like a deeper look into everything we've talked about today. It's definitely good to make your brain think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
Um, yeah.
Anything else from anybody else?
For anyone that's made it
There's
this
one.
far into the podcast, I just want to say, if you want to say in the comments like a question you want us to cover, or a series,
Or an
maybe,
anime.
Or a series or whatever
series or
else.
animes or just whatever. It doesn't even have to be related to the Christian religion. Just drop it in there, and if it's something that we think that we could cover and do justice to, then we will.
Or if you want to talk
Yeah,
about how
'cause-
pretentious Steven is, that is completely okay. Like, that is fine.
Do I come off as pretentious?
Well, I mean, when your answer
I
to
wouldn't
half the
say
things we say
pretentious.
is why.
You have
Steven,
beaten
you're not
Maine
pretentious.
30 times with a, what do you mean? I'm just joking. JK,
Okay.
JK, LOL, folks.
Because if I come across as pretentious, that makes me feel bad.
No.
You don't,
No.
you don't come.
No,
You're
you
not
don't.
actually,
It's me
just joking.
being mean toward you because
Okay,
I love you.
all right.
And I don't know how to
I
show
appreciate
affection in a normal way. So this is what
That's
I do.
okay. That's how men show affection, jerk.
Yeah, we
I-
just punch each other in the arm, and that's like 3 months worth of therapy.
Okay,
It's
so
like
I
I saw this meme. Hold on, wait, I saw this meme where it was like girls when they're talking to each other.
Yes.
Am I fat? It's like, no, of course not. And it's like guys talking to each other. Am I
Bro,
fat?
you're fat.
I know 5
I
fat
just saw
people,
that
and you are
today.
4 of them.
I saw that today. Duffy, what were you gonna
was
say?
gonna say, I finally understand this. One of the things that Steven told me early on in our once we started working was that men can really you never really know a man and you never really befriend a man until you guys have thrown hands with each other. I didn't quite get that, and I started watching Baki and the Yasha Ape, Hanayama, and every other man that Baki throws hands with. After that, they're just like best buds, and I'm like, oh, that's where he got it from. That's where you got that idea from.
Yeah, there's plenty of people that I was enemies with. We duked it out, and at the end of it, we were fine. we were buddies. There's been very few situations where I've thrown hands with somebody that we didn't walk away in a better place.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You develop that respect.
Yep. Anywho,
Who wants to sign us off?
Gary
Nate,
should.
if you want to sign us off here. Oh, okay. That's
Yeah, no,
fine.
he started it. He ends it.
Oh,
Fine.
me? Okay.
End it, Gary.
Let's end it now.
Finish it.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you for joining us on the Power of God in Anime. Join us next time, and till next time, train hard. Good luck.
Or something.
And
Something like that.
Or
I don't know.
something.
Good luck and train
That's
hard.
my sign off. Get your own.
Sorry.
hard.